Hi, I'm Zarina Matcha and you're watching Non-Feminist Gal. This video is going to be quite long and delving into some things about me personally, including sexual trauma. This is a large topic which I do have many thoughts around and have thought deeply about, and lots of ground is going to be covered in this video around sex, virginity, religion, and social expectations. I would describe myself as a very sexually and emotionally repressed teenager. I did not know how to handle my emotions and often suppressed a lot of negative emotions. I would lash out and have quite extreme anger outbursts. In my late teens, I had problems with alcoholism and self-harming, and I've also been struggling with ongoing panic attacks and anxiety since I was 19. In terms of sexual repression, I was greatly afraid of sex and my sexuality. I didn't even start masturbating until I was 17, and I viewed sex as this very big, scary thing. Sometimes I would get drunk and be overly flirty with guys and then run away at the thought of anything sexual. I was very fearful, very insecure, and very repressed, which I imagine is the case for many young women and possibly even young men. I'm not at all sure where this came from. I wasn't raised religious. My parents are very open-minded. I live and grew up in London, which is one of the most open-minded, socially liberal cities in the world. I do think that a lot of this stemmed from personal anxiety and perhaps some of the harmful messages that I believe young women are still sold around sex, which I will delve into a little bit later. I had a few boyfriends in my teens, but because of my fearfulness, I didn't do anything sexual with them, even though a part of me wanted to, but I was so consumed by fear and insecurity, plus the relationships were very brief and not so serious. I placed a really high emotional significance on virginity and on sex, and had all of these extremely idealistic, unrealistic expectations around sex and losing my virginity. Unfortunately, this led me into the arms of a very unhealthy, toxic, and all-round unkind young man whom I met when I was 18. We met through mutual friends and we got together, and he was the first guy I did anything sexual with. He wasn't older, he was my age but more experienced than me, and in hindsight he definitely took advantage of my nervousness, my insecurity, my vulnerability, and lack of experience. I remember feeling really desperate to have sex. I had this deep urge to do it before I turned 19, as for some reason I was like, I don't want to be a 19-year-old virgin, even though there's really nothing wrong with this. I really did not like being a virgin. I was really conflicted and torn between having all of these very strong sexual needs, yet also wanting sex to be this deeply special and emotionally intimate thing. I wanted sex to be with somebody that I loved or had deep feelings for, but sadly I ended up infatuated with a rather unhealthy person whom I did not love and did not have a very healthy relationship with. Within about 3 weeks of us being together, I decided I was ready to go all the way. We had done some sexual things before this, but I was like, yeah, I'm ready, I want to have sex. So the day that it happened, the two of us were lying on his bed, and 1 minute we were fully clothed, and then the next we had no clothes on and he was entering me. It was the worst pain of my life. It felt like someone had gotten a knife and was stabbing me in the vagina. I screamed and I shouted, and he told me to be quiet, and he said that I wasn't making his job any easier and that it was going to hurt and there was nothing he could do about it. He came out of me and he tried to stretch me out a little, and then he entered me again, and once again I screamed and I shouted, and then he put his hand over my mouth, lifted up my leg, and attempted to continue entering me while I was still shouting and being in this horrible pain. I pushed him off me and he got really irritated. I felt awful. I apologized. I said I was really sorry, and he rolled over and said that he couldn't do this, and then he lit a joint and tried to kiss me and have sex with me again, but I just couldn't do it. I was just in too much pain, and there was so much blood all over my underwear and his sheets, and a few days later I actually went to the doctor because I was physically in so much pain. We tried to have sex again about a week later. I could tell that he was very frustrated, and I felt so horrible and even more insecure and pathetic, and he kept telling me to just do it, and I kept on whining and saying that it hurt. He just got really irritated with me. The whole thing was just awful. It was such an unpleasant experience. He was not tender or gentle at all. He was just very frustrated with me and almost treated me like I was an inconvenience. And I didn't feel safe. I felt so pathetic and naive, like a loser and a baby. And I had this huge cognitive dissonance because I was very, very sexually attracted to him and rather infatuated with him. And it wasn't like I was utterly sexless. I did instigate it. I did want to have sex, but the pain and the emotional discomfort I felt was just too much to bear. We did end up having proper sex because he kept saying that if we didn't have sex, that he was going to break up with me. And I was so scared to lose him, so I managed to just psych myself up and make myself more comfortable and try and get into it. And it did still hurt, and he did keep telling me to shut up, but we did manage to get there. He didn't really like me making noise, and, you know, I'm a very noisy person, but he just, you know, I just kind of got on with it, I guess. We were only together for a couple of months before I broke up with him because, needless to say, he was a very nasty person. He definitely mistreated me. He used my body for sex. He also performed anal sex on me without my consent. We were doing it, you know, from behind, and he was kind of just entering me. One minute we were just doing it the normal way, and the next minute he was trying to go in my butt, and it was just, again, very painful. And I was saying to him, you know, why are you doing this? And he was like, oh, it feels so good. And yeah, there was a lot of really quite messed up things that he did to me, in all honesty. He also complained a lot. He was a very unhappy person and pretty much just used me to be his personal therapist and his personal porn star therapist. I actually have a poem with this name in my poetry book, Single Broke Female. For people who don't know, I'm an author. That's my full-time profession. We didn't really go out much. We didn't really go on dates. We mainly just sat in his room, smoked weed, and watched cartoons, and occasionally went to the park. And he just talked about how he hated everyone and just had me there to do sexual favors for him. He was a very unhappy guy. He'd had a very abusive life. He'd been to jail 3 times. He had a severe marijuana dependency issue and some mild psychosis. He was heavily depressed, very negative, just a very, very unpleasant person. And as mentioned, because of my naivety and lack of experience, I was so besotted with him. And I thought he was this good, caring person. And he always told me that he loved me and he cared about me and he didn't deserve me. But I didn't realize that I was being taken advantage of. And it was just a very unhealthy and overall bad relationship. And my novel Around Midnight is partially based on this relationship. The reason why I give this story is because I do think that society still pressures young women to be good girls and places this unnecessarily high emphasis on female virginity. Even in the 21st century, there still seems to be this problem of telling girls that we should be good, that our virginity is precious, and that if we have sex on the first date or are too sexual, there's something wrong with us, and all of these very harmful messages. And women are still judged more harshly than men for having multiple sexual partners or for being too sexual, and are expected to make men wait for sex, just suppressing our innate sexuality. And ironically, women do judge each other far more harshly than men when it comes to sex and sexuality in general, which feminists never talk about. Growing up, I felt a lot of pressure to be a good girl, someone who did her homework and didn't drink and wasn't the type to be sexual with boys. And I have always looked very young for my age, and I have quite a soft and innocent looking face, so this obviously didn't help. And thus, I was obviously attracted to a guy who was the exact opposite of me. Very bad, very rebellious, very disturbed, and I suppose I saw him being with him in hindsight as an act of rebellion. It was like, yeah, look at me, I'm with this bad boy. So cringe. Now, I know that most feminists would agree with me on the above, and this is something I do tend to agree with feminists on, as there are a lot of things I agree with feminists on. However, the problem that I have with feminism is that it simply says sexism and then it just closes the conversation without looking at the historical context regarding many things. The reality is, things are more complicated than feminism often claims, and I don't think that throwing words around like misogynist or sexist is very helpful or even wholly true. So firstly, the concept of virginity is entirely socially constructed. It's not an actual scientific or tangible thing. When a woman has sex for the first time, her hymen does not break, it stretches. The hymen can stretch from horse riding, riding a bicycle, using a tampon, masturbating, sticking a cucumber up there, etc. So one's hymen can already be stretched before sex. And what's interesting is that while a woman's hymen stretches, there is no physical indicator of male virginity. Women often, but not always, bleed the first time they have sex. I bled a lot. However, nothing really physically happens to men, besides maybe coming too quickly, I suppose. In our tribal hunter-gatherer age, polyamory and bisexuality was rather common, and many tribes were indeed matrilineal. It was common for women to mate with multiple men, to have children with different genetic variation, and it was equally common for men to spread their seed with multiple women. Monogamy is, well, some anthropologists have theorized, it was something that became commonplace during the agrarian age. If we look at ancient Greece, female virginity was not connoted with virtue or purity. It was about feminine strength and independence. Some of the young Amazon warriors who abstained from sex were viewed as strong women who were independent of a man and not submitting to men by having sex with them. An example is the Greek female virgin goddesses Hestia, Artemis, and Athena. In fact, Parthenos, the Greek word for virgin, is said to just mean a maiden or a young unmarried woman. The same goes for goddesses in Hindu mythology, and much of Greek mythology was taken from Hindu mythology, as Hinduism is the world's oldest known religion. Being a female virgin was more about being independent of male control. Ironically, this has more in common with feminist philosophy, and it makes sense too. If you view male-female heterosexual sex as symbolic of women submitting to men and a man entering her with his patriarchal stick, then abstaining from that can be viewed as an act of true feminism. That's what political lesbians in the 70s and 80s believed anyway. One could even say that political lesbianism is the logical conclusion of feminism, ask Andrea Dworkin. When humans began to live in agrarian societies, family lineage became patrilineal rather than matrilineal, as it had previously been, mostly in non-Western tribes. In this time, there was no birth control, so if a woman had a child, the only way to ensure that the child was her husband's was if the woman was a virgin. Virginity became something that made a woman more valuable, as it meant that she had no children with previous men. Female virginity became used to control women's fertility and was used as a bargaining chip for marriage, as when a man married a woman, he was expected to provide for her for the rest of his life. Divorce was generally frowned upon. We should also remember that people back then lived much shorter lives than they do today, so people needed to get married and procreate young in order to keep the human race going. Although feminists often claim that a wife was a man's property, this wasn't actually true. When a man and a woman got married, they became united as one family, and this was connoted with land and property ownership. It was about the family being viewed as one unit, opposed to the man owning the woman. The post-agrarian age was about complementarianism, which is where men and women worked together in complementary gender roles. It wasn't about men oppressing women, it was about division of labor. The same can also even be said for our hunter-gatherer age. In fact, throughout most of human history, men and women have worked together in complementary gender roles. This is not about oppression. It was simply about division of labor, and I really don't understand why feminist rhetoric keeps on pushing this idea that this is sexist. Men and women working together in complementary gender roles is not sexist. Female virginity was used in exchange for a man having to provide and protect a woman. Marriage throughout human history was mostly about economics and the merging of two families. The idea of love as the defining reason for marriage only really became popular in Europe during the Victorian era with the rise of Romanticism. Virginity became about personal virtue in the advent of the Judaic religions. It is the Judaic religions, specifically Christianity, which spread across Western Europe, which created the idea of sex being about virtue and premarital sex being a sin. This is where the distinction of a woman as a good woman and a bad woman grew from, and this was largely based around the idea of sex. Good women in the Abrahamic religions are obedient, submissive, and chaste until marriage. Bad women are rebellious and sexually lewd, hence why Lilith was cast out of the Garden of Eden for rebelling against God. The sexual revolution of the 1960s was triggered not by feminism, but by contraception and secular liberal attitudes towards sex. Highly accurate paternity testing, something which I do think is very necessary and important in order to prevent paternity fraud, also became prominent in the 1960s. There is no rational reason anymore for female virginity to have value placed on it. We have contraception, condoms, abortion, and paternity testing. So if a woman has had sex with a lot of people and then gets married, if she used protection and birth control, there's a very minimal chance of her having children with another guy. Furthermore, in a secular society, sex outside of marriage is no longer viewed as sinful. It's viewed as a normal, natural thing. Yet because we still have this cultural hangover from Christianity around associating female sexuality with personal virtue, this still affects many young women today. This is why women are often told to not have sex on the first date, or why young girls shame other girls for being sexual. Feminism blames this on patriarchy, but it's not patriarchy, it's religion and natural female competitiveness. The Abrahamic religions are what created this idea of female virginity being a symbol of virtue. Before that, female virginity was used as an economic commodity, which was unhealthy, yes, but this was about economics and division of labor, not sexism. In countries that follow Sharia law, honor killings can take place if a woman has sex before marriage. This would not happen in a secular society because secular morality does not view sex as a measure of personal virtue. And even though I abhor the Abrahamic religions, it's not entirely accurate to describe them as oppressing women. Both men and women are held to high standards of moral character in the Bible, Quran, and the Torah. A good woman is viewed as obedient, submissive, and sexually chaste, yes, but a man must also be honorable and equally submissive to the divine word of God. It's not like only women are told to behave in a certain way. Men still had to provide and prove their worth in order to earn a woman's virginity. The Abrahamic religions impose moral absolutism on both men and women. An example of this is that in the Quran it says that a man is allowed to take multiple wives. However, he must also provide for those wives. It's not like he's allowed to just be given a wife. He does have to provide. He does have to have that financial stability. It's not as simple as saying that women were oppressed. Both men and women in Judaic religions are held to high standards of moral character and moral absolutism. Even though society has come a long way around how sex is viewed for women, I do still think that we're not as sexually open-minded as we could be. This is also something which I abhor feminism for. It claims to promote female sexual liberation, yet when women display sexually liberal behaviors, feminism complains about women being sexually objectified and pandering to the male gaze. Moreover, most feminist lobbyist groups were and still are very anti-prostitution, which should be viewed as the ultimate symbol of female sexual liberation, as it allows physically attractive women to capitalize on their sexuality. I do think that we need to stop romanticizing and placing such a high value on virginity, particularly for women, as this is so unhealthy. Women don't lose anything when we have sex for the first time. We gain a whole new side to ourselves. There is no shame in a woman being sexual or having sexual feelings. This old Judaic ideal of non-sexual women being good girls and sexual women being bad girls really needs to be abolished. I hate how women are still viewed as less good for having multiple sexual partners or as more good for having little sexual partners. In an age of contraception, paternity testing, condoms, and so on, there is no need for female virginity to be used as a bargaining tool, or for women to manipulate men into marriage by saying no sex until marriage, or for people to repress their sexuality for the sake of wanting to appear good. By the way, I'm not saying that sex shouldn't have any value. I'm not saying that the first time one has sex shouldn't be viewed as an important emotionally and physically significant experience. Of course, people should still treat their first sexual experience as important and significant, and I do think it's ideal for people to share this with someone whom they trust and care for, rather than some random stranger or someone who doesn't respect you, as in my case. But this idea that you lose something or that you are no longer innocent is really harmful because it leads women to suppress our sexuality and then potentially make poor sexual choices later on. In fact, Carl Jung talks about this when he discusses the concept of the shadow self and how if you suppress your shadow, the stronger it grows and the more it comes out. If women are taught to suppress our sexuality, then it will only come out in extremely dark and unhealthy ways. Furthermore, I do think it's fair to say that most people's first sexual experience is often rather underwhelming and awkward. It's hardly the most amazing sex of one's life. Yes, of course it does change people a little, but it's not like you become a whole different person. I do think idealizing and mystifying first-time sex in the way the society still does is harmful, because it means that people project unrealistic expectations onto it, rather than viewing this as a natural human experience that is significant, but is not necessarily life-altering. Take Princess Diana. Her appeal was largely based on her being a virgin bride, and this became exploited as she got coerced into an unhappy marriage with an unfaithful man. When virginity goes hand in hand with innocence and purity, then of course women can be taken advantage of and have this used against women. I do think it's much healthier for women to view our sexuality as something that we have control and agency over. I would love for us to return to the idea of female virginity being about agency and power to act on it as we choose, rather than being pure and chaste and untouched. This puts women in a position of strength, rather than in a position of weakness, which the whole idea of innocence and purity often puts women into. Since becoming sexually active, I have had sex with a lot of men, and for me this has been an overall positive and necessary thing to do. I've shed a lot of sexual hang-ups that I had during my teens and my early 20s. Even though my first sexual encounter was horrible and it was with a horrible guy, I've had many wonderful sexual experiences since and a lot of fun. I really can't complain. I don't have any regrets about sleeping with anybody, and in all honesty, there's a few people I regret not sleeping with, where I was in situations where I could have gone for it, but those old feelings of I need to be good and wait came to mind. And in hindsight, I really wish I hadn't allowed myself to ever be consumed by those feelings, and I really do regret ever trying to suppress my sexuality. I do think that if two people find each other sexually attractive, then they should go for it. It's natural. It shouldn't be this huge big deal. And I've never felt judged or like a guy has viewed me as a whore or some silly term. I mean, maybe not to my face. But at the end of the day, who cares? It's not healthy to be so consumed about what other people think. It's best to focus on yourself and do what makes you feel good, not pander to social stereotypes. I really couldn't care less about people viewing me as a slut or whatever. I mean, yeah, sure, technically I am, but I think that's okay. Why does that have to be a bad thing? I'm just a human being who's had sex with a lot of people, and I don't think women should feel ashamed for this. I think that we should accept ourselves and get on with life, because at the end of the day, it's really not that big of a deal, and no one really cares that much. I know that some would say that this attitude makes me sound like a feminist, but this is precisely what I dislike about choice feminism. Just because a woman makes a decision and takes control doesn't make her a feminist. I can't stand how nowadays any action that a woman takes is viewed as synonymous with feminism. Choice feminism has made every decision a woman makes as some political act. My sex life has nothing to do with politics, and I'm not a fan of slut walks, as for me, sex is still a private decision, and I don't see why we have to turn our sex lives into a big political statement. Not everything women do needs to be politicized, which choice feminism has done, which is why so many women nowadays feel coerced into identifying as feminists, which has made feminism really lose a lot of its original meaning, which was about abolishing the patriarchy, not women being able to make choices. By the way, as I asserted in my casual sex video, I know that casual sex is not for everyone, and for many women it can be heartbreaking and demoralizing, which again is where the idea of reclaiming female sexuality should come into play. For me, sexual liberation isn't necessarily about having sex with loads of people. It's about making choices which are going to bring you personal enjoyment. If that means having sex with lots of people, only people you're in exclusive relationships with, or no one, then that is what is liberating. And I do think that I have needed to have casual sex as a way to boost my confidence and shed that sense of teenage naivety. I'm not saying that casual sex is completely hedonistic and wonderful, by the way. Of course, it does still come with inner conflicts, but overall for me, casual sex has helped my anxiety and helped me gain emotional security and self-confidence and become less bothered about how people or men see me and learn to just go with the flow and have more of a relaxed attitude to life. I also feel more emotionally secure in myself and less emotionally dependent on men because my attitude to men is now more laid back as opposed to projecting unrealistic expectations onto them. I've rarely had these experiences where I had casual sex or a one night stand with a guy and wanted it to lead some more. It's more like we're just having a good time in the moment sort of thing. Just, learning to just go with the flow. I really do feel that it's helped me in that regard. I don't think feminism is very helpful when it tells women that we shouldn't be slut shamed and constantly shouts about slut shaming. This is something that I used to think when I was younger, but in hindsight, I think the idea of telling people not to shame women isn't very good because it's trying to control what other people think. And the reality is we can't tell other people how to think. We can't force our worldview onto other people. I don't think that we should go around saying, don't shame women. Instead, I think that slutty women should learn to be comfortable with our own choices. Once you become secure in yourself, you won't care or be so bothered about what society thinks because it's really not all that significant. We should learn instead to be more comfortable in ourselves and stop caring so much about what people think. I understand that saying this on the internet is going to get me negative responses, and people probably are going to say rather rude things to me in the comments, just as me saying that I'm not a feminist is also going to garner a lot of negative responses. But as a mature adult, I must learn to manage this and accept that this is part of society and the fact that some people are assholes and there's really nothing you can do. I have also noticed, by the way, that there's now a rise of the term fuckboy, a term used to basically describe a male slut, which I don't hear feminists complaining about. This is so typical of feminism, setting one standard for women and then another standard for men. If men aren't supposed to call women sluts anymore, then why is it okay for women to call men fuckboys? I hear women use this term all the time and think to myself, how would you like it if someone called you a whore? Why can't we just be more polite and compassionate to one another rather than throwing these silly terms around? But again, you can't change how people think, you can only change yourself. I know that there's a large body of information on the internet all about how men care about body count and women's sexual partner count, which again is still rooted in the old Judeo-Christian ideal of female virtue being tied to our sexuality. We must remember that secular morality has only really been dominant in the West for less than a century. I do think that realistically we need to accept the fact that some men do care about partner count, and the best thing is to just avoid men for whom this is a big issue and instead focus on working on your inner confidence. When you're confident with who you are, you won't be bothered about what men think or men caring about body count. I honestly wouldn't want to befriend, date, or be in a relationship with a man who placed a high emphasis on this, as to me it is a rather petty and useless thing to care about, and I would rather be with a guy who shares my rather socially liberal, laid-back values than a guy who thinks that a woman is less wife material because of the amount of sexual partners she has had. I believe in the old adage, lady in public, whore in private. But I also respect the fact that yes, some men do care about sexual partner count, and they have every right to. People have a right to value whatever they desire in a romantic partner. Some people only ever want to marry people of the same ethnicity to them, and they should have that personal right. Men are allowed to reject a woman based on her sexual partner count. That's their choice. The only thing I do find rather strange is men who themselves have had sex with a lot of people who then say that they want a woman who is a virgin or has slept with a very small amount of people. I can understand a man who's only slept with, say, 5 people to then desire a woman who also has only slept with 5 or fewer people. But for a man who's been with like 20 women and then demands that his future bride be a virgin is probably very insecure and has a very strangely warped way of looking at the world that I personally can't relate to. And there is something rather pedophilic about this as well. I do think about a sexually experienced man demanding that his future wife be a virgin. Most people become sexually active between the age of 16 and 19, so demanding that a woman be sexually untouched when the man himself has been with a lot of women does seem to be more about control and possessiveness over a woman. And this sort of attitude is more prevalent in Islamic societies or societies where people are less educated and still associate female virginity with virtue. I could almost forgive feminism for calling men out on this, if not for the fact that virginal woman and experienced man is a trope played out across the romance genre, including 50 Shades of Grey, which is mostly read and consumed by women. So clearly women are just as bad at fetishizing female virginity and male dominance as some men are. But feminists rarely call women out on anything because apparently it's only sexist when men do it. So in summary, female virginity was originally about a symbol of feminine strength and independence. The agrarian age made it be about assuring paternity, and religion made it about virtue and moral absolutism. I do think that there's a handful of sexually experienced men out there who do fetishize female virginity, and this is very chauvinistic and tied to wanting to control women and viewing women as something to be owned. But most men don't think like this, especially if they're educated and live in liberal societies and were raised to view women as equals and don't associate female sexuality with virtue. I also want to make it absolutely clear that I don't think there's anything wrong with someone wanting to place a high emphasis on their virginity and not wanting to have sex before marriage and equally desiring that in a partner. I do think it's dangerous to idealize and romanticize losing one's virginity and placing largely mystical expectations around it, as even if one is in a loving, caring relationship when they have their first sexual experience, it probably won't be very satisfying. For most people, it's quite awkward and uncomfortable and underwhelming. It's hardly the most exciting sex that one is likely to have in their life because sex typically gets more better with experience. When people idealize and romanticize virginity too much, they're essentially setting themselves up for disappointment because whenever you place too high expectations on something, you are inevitably going to be disappointed because things will never match up to your expectations. Instead, I think it's best to accept the fact that yes, your first sexual experience is going to be a very emotionally and physically significant thing, but it's not the most life-altering, earth-shattering thing you will ever do. Instead, I think it's best to be more practical and have more of a realistic attitude to these sorts of things as opposed to mystifying things so much. But what do you think? Do you think that virginity is a chauvinistic idea? Do you think the society still tells young women to be good girls? Are there any historical details that I may have gotten wrong? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching.